So if you've been watching YouTube music criticism for any length of time at all, you'll know that one of the bread and butter formats is to take all the albums by a particular band and rank them, usually in a list from worst to best. I've been known to do one or two things myself in that vein, but I generally try to avoid topics that have been done to death, and at this point, I have to admit that the idea of, for instance, ranking every King Crimson studio album has been done enough that it feels kind of unoriginal to be, the 21st person to do it. But while I'm wary of doing a generic ranking video, I've been thinking lately about whether or not all of those ranking videos can be kind of synthesized into sort of an ultimate ranking, right? There's an effect I've heard of, I think it's called the wisdom of the crowds, where, you put, let's say, a cow in front of a room full of people. You ask them all to guess the weight of the cow. You take their guesses, you average them out, and you'll probably get the exact weight of the cow, even if none of the people in the room know anything about cows, right? There's a similar effect that you might see sometimes in a college statistics class where maybe a professor will have a jar full of jelly beans. You ask everybody in the room to guess how many jelly beans are in the jar. You average all their guesses, and you'll get the accurate number of jelly beans, even if none of the individual guesses was accurate. So I wanted to see if I could take every YouTube video ranking the King Crimson studio album catalog and kind of average that into a master list that would kind of be the ultimate King Crimson ranking based on the thoughts and input of every prog-oriented music critic on YouTube. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about that process. I'm going to show you the master ranking that was created. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I actually think it's pretty accurate. And then we'll do a little countdown to see which YouTube music critic came closest to the correct ranking. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We are a contemporary art rock project that mixes aspects of prog rock, post-rock, and post-punk. In the description for this video, I've included a link to a playlist of some of my favorite of our material. And of course, you can find us on Bandcamp or your favorite streaming service. So for this project, I extracted a ranking from every YouTube video I could find, which ranked the King Crimson albums. That was 20 of them. I didn't watch all 20 straight through. I skimmed, used automatic chapters, did various things to, as quickly as possible, extract what the ranking was, right? I'll put a list in the description of this video of the names of the channels involved. Now, I know you could get a similar effect by listing these albums based on their Metacritic scores. To some extent, I'm kind of doing the same thing here that Metacritic is, but the Metacritic ranking is going to include reviews from people who either aren't familiar with the whole catalog or who have a hostile stance toward all of prog rock or toward King Crimson, right? So this is a synthesis of reasonably informed judgments from people who generally like this stuff, and I think there's some value in that. Now, this is definitely the most tedious experience I've ever had assembling a video, getting the ranking from 20 different ranking videos. I'd really like to believe it was worth it, so if you are currently getting ready to type a comment saying that all music opinions are totally subjective, the idea of an objective ranking is pointless, please don't do that. Obviously, subjectivity is inextricable from the aesthetic response, and I do think that's part of the beauty of it. But I think it's also true that people have subjective responses to objectively definable qualities of the music. Those objective qualities can be sorted hierarchically. Now, those qualities might include innovation, right? In the Court of the Crimson King, when it came out, sounded like nothing anyone had ever heard before. In the Wake of Poseidon, objectively, did not. That might include musicianship, right? Try playing the title track to Discipline on guitar, then try playing Formentera Lady on guitar. You'll quickly see that one is objectively more complex. And accessibility is a statistically measurable metric, right? If I play Made Kudasai to 100 people, that 100 people, most of them will feel good while it's on, and a day later they'll remember how it went. They'll remember melodies, lyrical ideas from it. Neither of those things is going to be true of the mincer. So I think ultimately, somebody's response to a music is a combination of both personal aesthetic responses and objectively verifiable, documentable aspects of the music, right? There are objective qualities that they are subjectively responding to. And that mixture of the objective and subjective response is, I think, the really kind of the interesting thing about any experience with a work of art. And for that reason, I think it's actually an interesting experiment to try to average those preferences out to see if perhaps you can come up with a reasonably objective, defensible ranking of how the albums stack up outside of personal preference. Now, as far as how I did the math, I just added up the position numbers of each album and listed them in descending order by the total. So, if a given album was ranked on 3 lists in first, third, and first place, that would be 5 points, right? 1 plus 3 plus 1. If another album was ranked on the same lists, second, and fourth, that would be 8 points, right? 2 plus 2 plus 4. The 5-point album would be better ranked in the average than the 8-point album. The lower the score, the better the album does. Now, dead last with a whopping 224 points, we have The Construction of Light. I actually adore this album, personally. That's probably because I was 16 when it came out. It was the first album I ever made a trip to the CD store on my own, driving the car myself with the specific goal of buying after I got my driver's license. But, leaving aside my own personal fondness for this album, I do recognize the flat production, the diminished instrumental firepower following the exit of Levin and Bruford, and the relative absence of accessible hooks compared to other Baloo material. Now, 12th with 218 points, we have Beat, and at 11th, we have Three of a Perfect Pair with 206. These albums are often mentioned in the same breath, so I'll just mention them both here. To be clear, I think there's some excellent writing here, and these songs came to life brilliantly in a live setting. I'd even say that the live album Absent Lovers is as good as any of the albums that are going to be in the top 3 later on, right? So I think these were recorded during a period where they were arguably as good as they ever were, but something about the production really drains the life out of the material and constrains the spontaneity of the performances. And I think there's as big a gap here as there ever was between the quality of the studio work and the power of the live presentation. That has a lot to do with these ending up so low here. At number 10 with 181 points is The Power to Believe. This may be the best sounding album they ever had, with thunderous production. It's consistently emotional, it's fairly complex, but at the same time, it really doesn't break any new ground, besides maybe some of the use of electronics. And, as with Construction of Light, there's a lack of more striking, memorable songwriting compared to other Baloo material. Number 9, at 160 points, is Islands, which is also notable for the biggest spread of positions, with one of the list makers putting it dead last, another putting it in second place. I think that spread is nicely symbolic, actually, since some people find the quiet, mellow atmospheres of this album enchanting. Others find it much too sedate and simple to wear the King Crimson name, Robert Fripp himself perhaps included in that list. It's certainly the least characteristically King Crimson album, although it does have parts which became trademarks, especially for the most recent live lineup of the band. Now, edging out Islands by just 1 point is Thrack at number 8. I think the Baloo era, it was great live. It made one of the band's all-time great studio albums, but for one reason or another, most of the studio work with Baloo isn't quite in the upper echelon. In the case of Thrack, the issue is a lack of cohesion, right? Every song here seems in a vacuum, somewhere between kinda cool and completely brilliant, but as a collection, it has maybe the least cohesive vision of any of the albums on this list. It's the album where it most seems like it's just kind of odd that this bit goes next to this bit, goes next to this bit. 7th place with 132 points is Lizard. This and Islands, they were both very poorly regarded for a long time. I obviously haven't been into King Crimson as long as the generation of people ahead of me were, but even I remember a time when almost nobody had anything good to say about these albums. But at some point in the last 20 years, there was a big sea change, and now, I don't know if I've heard people talk about Lizard in particular with anything besides fondness and respect since maybe about 2003 or so, right? I think Lizard has entered that category of album that's so often referred to as underrated that it's probably actually become properly rated, not unlike Tornado or Wind and Wuthering. In sixth place, just 1 point ahead of Lizard, is The Wake of Poseidon. This album is widely acknowledged as great but derivative, since, almost every song on here has an obvious counterpart on Court of the Crimson King, except maybe Cat Food and The Devil's Triangle, both of which are, to be fair, completely awesome and fairly unique in the King Crimson catalog. Now, maybe some people could argue that one of those songs is, in some technical or abstract sense, better than its court counterpart, but they really are much less powerful at a visceral level. They're much less striking. And this is a band where we should be looking, I think, quite askance at a less powerful copy of an earlier work. At fifth, with 116 points, we have Discipline. Now, this is the last truly innovative work produced by any of the 70s prog titans. Maybe you could even argue it's the last completely forward-looking album in the whole history of progressive rock, depending on how you draw the barriers, right? The mixture here of prog rock with minimalist neoclassical composition. There are a lot of shades here of Steve Reich, Terry Riley. Not a lot of the other prog bands mix that element in such a striking way. And, that is not just a daring reinvention, but one of the boldest things they've ever done. Fourth, with 115 points, another 1 point lead, is Starless and Bible Black. The best stuff here is the equal of anything, right? And while some people are annoyed by the inclusion of the live improvs, and I'll admit that I think they actually work better in the context of a full live show, the highs here are higher than the highs on anything else below it on this list. And, this is the kind of band where you get a lot of points for daring and creativity. If you took out one of the improv tracks and replaced it with a good studio version of Dr. Diamond, then this album would have been so good that it might have torn a hole in the universe. In a very solid third place, with 74 points, Lark's Tongues and Aspic. Now, I'm personally a little partial to the more visceral atmospheres of Starless, but this album is probably front to back more listenable. You could even argue it's the first King Crimson album that fully lived out the promise of the idea of King Crimson, with more consistently complex writing and a better integration of the improv elements than Court of the Crimson King. Really a perfect balance of complex writing and spontaneity and straightforward hooks. Now we have a stunning upset here in the top two, with Court of the Crimson King coming in at second with 57 points. And honestly, I don't listen to this album as often as most of the other things on this list, or even personally feel as fond of it. My hot take here is that part of the reason this album succeeded on the scale it did is that the construction of the songs is actually relatively simple compared to most other King Crimson. Aside from the midsection of Schizoid, it's mostly 4/4 verse, chorus, verse. I think that reduces its re-listenability compared to other King Crimson, if you're the sort of person who spends a lot of time listening to King Crimson. But the songs also have amazing energy and power, and I think that energy and power is readily evident to people who don't like other King Crimson. And that really did give it, I think, both a freshness in its time and a legacy that's about as important as anything that was done by any of the great prog bands. And at number one, with a mere 47 points, we have Red. It's catchy, it's emotional, it's as heavy as music got in 1974. The writing, the playing, the arrangement, those are all sophisticated as hell. It has enough improv to signal the importance of improv as a technique for this band without disrupting the atmosphere or letting it distract too much from the writing. Everything King Crimson ever did well is here. All right, so I think that the wisdom of the crowds here has actually gathered us a really good King Crimson ranking that I'm willing to stand by as a pretty defensible one. Let's see who came closest. So in fourth place, with 3 correct picks each, we have a 6-way tie between the Dylan Corner, who said his video was inspired by how bad he thought another King Crimson ranking video was, and he has in fact beaten that video, so points for being the shit stirrer of the King Crimson album ranking world, and also for being able to back it up with a good ranking. DK Media Music, who was kind enough to edit his video in a way which made it exceptionally easy to get the ranking without having to watch the whole thing. The Rustic Reviewer, whose general aesthetic and production style feel Very 2007, gave me some flashbacks to my post-college days. Panos Antypas, the only non-English speaker on this list. Ranking the Obscure, who really has cornered the market on this sort of thing very effectively. And Sea of Tranquility, far and away the most popular of all the guys who sit and talk to a camera about prog rock, kind of the 800-pound gorilla of the world of people who have strong preferences about which is the best King Crimson album. So, you know, good to see that he's done well here. Third place, with 4 correct picks, goes to the soft-spoken Australian wizard Bicyclelegs. Now, we had 2 reviewers with 5 correct picks, Starman 2112 and the Prog Corner. So looking at the rest of the list, I'm going to say generally the Prog Corner is a bit closer. His albums where he didn't have them in the exact right spot, he generally had them closer to where I had them. So, you know, we'll give him a nod. So congrats to Starman 2112 on a very strong second. Kudos as well for having higher production values and tighter editing than probably anyone else on this list, certainly better than mine. I don't love putting the Prog Corner at number 1 because I've always secretly resented him a little bit since he started his channel right around the same time that I did, but got a bigger audience faster. But I'll admit that, you know, he did that by being knowledgeable, by uploading a bunch, and just generally being a pleasant, friendly guy. So, there you go. I have made the definitive King Crimson ranking video. If you enjoyed this, wanted to see me do another band, let me know in the comments. I sort of halfway hope that nobody does, because this was actually a shit ton of work compared to what I usually do. And I'll see you all in a week.